Well, in my last Nunchaku-related video, I showed you the pair on the left, right? The Nunchaku, or the Muge horse bridle. And possibly, if not probably, the inspiration for the Nunchaku, at least in Okinawa. And here's me playing around with that monster pair. So today, let's look at another exotic Nunchaku variation. Variation meaning relative to the modern standard, the two-stick symmetrical, right? Made world famous by Bruce Lee, of course, even though the first pair he picked up was not Okinawan. Regardless, let's talk and experiment with so-setsu-kon nunchaku, seen on the left. One long stick, one short stick. Pretty simple concept, right? If you do this and you do it right, you don't have to worry about rebound. That image is from Sensei Demura's book on the subject. Of course, the man who did so much to popularize Kobudo, like we've talked about. But yeah, typical nunchaku. Obviously, you do have theoretically the possibility of the striking stick coming back and striking you. As I've said before, price of admission to use this weapon, and of course you might know I'm firmly in the camp that thinks this danger is beyond overblown. And that puts me in the majority. Oh, I'm sorry, let me clarify. The majority of people who have actual practical skill with this weapon. And yes, that's a comment on all kinds of people, not just Shadowversity, who will tell you this is a terrible weapon despite having no practical skill. You can't know that unless you can demonstrate that you can use it. If you can't hit something really hard with it without practically falling over, even if you learned how to twirl it in your McDojo for a long, long time. If you weren't taught how to actually hit with it, then how can you speak to this? That being said, there is no doubt that you can hit yourself with a pair of nunchaku, and I do that harder than I ever have before in today's video. With this guy here in my left hand, the so-setsu-kon, I was experimenting with. Now, is it smart to swing full speed and power with a weapon you're just learning? Because this is a related but different weapon. No, but you know, whatever. I knew that going in. It is amazing, though, how shortening just one of the two sticks really changes the dynamics. Well, Okinawa wasn't the only place in the world, or even in East Asia, that thought, what if I make a flail that doesn't allow for hitting my own hand? That being said, I was surprised by what I found in swinging an actual pair. It's not as simple of a matter as you think, trust me, but we'll get to that. Here's an example of a similar thing from China. Ironically, it's a very real possibility that we wouldn't have the classic symmetrical twin-stick nunchaku if it wasn't for predecessors that were all asymmetrical. Maybe a mainland cavalry weapon like this, maybe the often mentioned agricultural flail. See our man on the left? That's a Japanese one. Here's a Korean one. None of this is as easy as obvious as people want to assume. That's why there is no historical certainty on this, and people can argue whichever side they want. Back to Okinawa and Kobudo, one thing we can say for certain is that the regulation nunchaku is far more popular than the so-setsu-kon. Is that just because it's better for flashy twirling, or might there actually be a practical reason for that? Well, that's why we're going to do experimentation in this video. Here's a picture from my book, Saps, Blackjacks, and Slingshots, A History of Forgotten Weapons, showing a Western version of exactly what we're talking about here, right? One long stick, one short stick, and this is an actual specimen too. This particular type was called in some quarters the Protestant flail. And I'd bet just about anything I'm the only martial arts author to ever find this picture and put it in an actual weaponry martial arts book. One thing is really clear in terms of East versus West. If you were going to fight with a flail in the West, it was going to be one shaped like this. It was going to have one stick significantly shorter. And notice, these are all street weapons, just like the nunchaku. These are not weapons of war. Now let's get on to the hands-on portion of the video. I was kind of careful with these, I'm going to be honest, because just like the Nunchaku that I showed you last time, the horse bridle, these are borrowed from my sensei, and they're old, so I did not want to smash them. As you might know, I do not believe in twirling nunchaku for fighting application, although it could be done for distraction technique, but I believe in strong, fast, linear swings. Now let's try the same by grabbing the long stick here in our specimen. As you might expect, with only about half of the mass on the striking end as normally, this does feel quicker. I'll go ahead and get a little twirly here just to compare it again to a standard set, then transition back into power. It feels pretty good, but let's think about this. Is that reduction in mass, that significant reduction in mass, worth the speed that I gain? I don't think so. Do you know what I mean? The regular nunchaku is already pretty fast. So let's try the no-load straight down strike. Well, it's fast, so fast you can't track it, but I can't say there's a significant difference. I'm gonna swing real hard here like I did when I broke the coconut in my original Nunchaku video. Those feel weighty, do you know what I mean? So let's compare. And once again, it does not feel like the increased speed, or at least theoretical increased speed, I'm not measuring this, makes up for the lack of mass. But then again, that might not matter to the designers because it was all about hand protection. What about the towel flick out, right? Very low power, but catch him by surprise, smack him in the face. I'm doing the one-handed version, which is not as effective, but I'm holding the other specimen with the other hand, so that'll have to do. Let's give it a shot. Well, to get a flinch reaction when you connect with the face, thereby giving the opportunity for a big follow-up, I could see that. And I'd even say the long stick, short stick variation is superior for that application. Redirecting that short stick is just going to be easier by default because it doesn't weigh as much, right? So for instance here, swinging around the standard chucks, and then when picking up the other ones and doing the same, I kind of find myself automatically getting into a little bit more of the distracting twirls. Right there. Because it's going to be easier to do that and to recover. A cool little thing that I happened upon there at the end. Notice when I switch hands here how it turns into a top-heavy, much more powerful weapon. Right? Once you're all of a sudden grabbing it by the short stick instead of the long stick, it really changes things. How about the not very sporting but very effective sucker punch? Just as effective with these as with the standard set. What if I do the same by grasping the short stick instead of the long one? Bam. Feels dangerous to me. I'm feeling more drawn to the short stick grasping method. So one thing to definitely note is that this is almost a 2-in-1 implement. It's really two different kinds of flails. The advantage of striking with the smaller stick is that control that we talked about and that recoverability. Here I'm experimenting with kind of getting it going almost from like mid-air. That does not feel very powerful, but I think it could definitely do the job. You hit any kind of bone, I think it's going to be very painful, even with those light smacking strikes. And I accidentally proved that on myself later. How did the two examples compare in terms of block strike? Not a dime's bit of difference. Now, what about the two-handed home run swing? Standard chucks? I have no doubt that will obliterate any body part it hits. Striking with a short stick two-handed? Feels okay. Kind of weird, actually. I mean, it works. Just for fun, let's break out the Nunchaku. And like I showed in my previous video, it feels absolutely devastating to do that with this. And at least because this model is so heavy, I think that's definitely the way to use it. By the way, I was told by my sensei that Nunchaku, that muge, is an exact copy of an original. So pretty crazy. As I mentioned a long time ago in my initial Nunchaku video, this is like a whole weapons system, really. It's different sizes, different shapes and weights, and therefore, you know, not radically different applications, but different. Now let's compare actually striking. In my original Nunchaku video, I just wailed as hard as I possibly could against things. As mentioned, I will not be doing that with today's borrowed fighting implement, but let's go ahead and see how it behaves differently. Reminder, this target here is way denser and bouncier, if you will, than any part of the human body. I'm including the skull when I say that, but that portion of my statement is up for debate, don't get me wrong. I'm walking with the short stick here, and overall it feels alright. The thing with a flail, especially one like this, is you have to know whether you're swinging all the way through or rebounding in order to negate bounce back. Hitting with the long stick now. And the thing is, you don't always get the opportunity to swing through the target. You just don't. Then with a fully flexible weapon like this, you have to pull back. All that being said, you can still hit yourself with the shortened stick because you're pulling the weapon back towards yourself. And I had not thought about that originally. I thought, okay, great, well, one thing is you can just swing with reckless abandon, but not so, at least not on a target like this. Now, some people who've actually used this thing in the street will tell you, oh, yes, you can, don't worry, because whatever you hit is going to break or collapse or otherwise absorb enough of the momentum that there's no real danger to you, and the preponderance of the video evidence against, body-like targets actually supports that. Hey, remember how I don't like majorette baton cheer squad twirling with this thing, and I don't think that's how it should be used? Even I got tempted by the dark side in making this video. I was having fun. I'd never swung this asymmetrical pair before this very day. Got a little too into twirling around myself, which I preach against, and I was painfully reminded why I think it's a bad idea. Right here, popped myself on the elbow, and my left arm was useless. I mean, it hurt all that day, had limited functionality for a lot of the day and evening, and that, by the way, was a very glancing blow, so anybody who thinks these things don't hit hard enough to work in a fight is insane. And of course, being stubborn, I shook it off and tried to keep going, and it was not a good idea. Dead arm. A fighting strength shot to that same spot on my elbow, and I guarantee you I would have been writhing around on the floor, absolutely helpless. So here we go, back to basics, and I'm okay. Broad linear strikes back and forth, multiple angles, and you will not do that to yourself. So-setsu-kon Nunchaku, a configuration that actually doesn't seem like much of an improvement, if any, to me. In particular, it sacrifices reach and grappling. Now, I'd have a very different opinion if this was a weapon of war. If you're fighting armored opponents, the odds of serious bounce back are just infinitely higher. But for a street weapon, which is what nunchaku and related tools are, it does not seem worth the trade-off. And maybe that's why they don't seem to have ever rivaled the standard configuration in popularity. And as a thought experiment, doesn't that indicate that the danger of the symmetrical nunchaku is overstated? I mean, if they had this alternative, why wouldn't all users have moved on to this? Why wouldn't this be the standard nunchaku? You can still do all the fancy twirling and hand-to-hand switching as I showed. Pain included, but yeah, the classic nunchaku flashiness, the ambidextrous use, everything. You get to keep that with this design, but without the supposedly high risk of self-injuries. Forget regular chucks though, back to this. It keeps the signature chuck characteristics in motion in use, while also being kind of a two-in-one flail. Can't say that about the Western flails I showed. Those would only ever be used by grasping the long stick. Well, that's enough nerding out for now.